And reactions are still trailing President Bola Tinubu's directive to ministers and heads of federal government agencies to reduce the number of vehicles in their convoys to 3. The special advisor to the president on information and strategy, Bayo Onanuga, made this announcement in a statement on Thursday, saying that the directive is part of measures to cut the cost of governance.
Well, the cost-cutting measure was announced today in a statement signed by the president. In January this year, President Tinubu took significant steps to reduce government expenditure by reducing his entourage on foreign trips from 50 to 20 officials. For local trips, he reduced it to 25 officials. He similarly reduced the vice president's entourage to 5 officials on foreign trips and 15 for local trips. In the directive issued today, President Tinubu also ordered all ministers, ministers of state, and heads of agencies to have at most 5 security personnel attached to them. The security team will comprise of 4 police officers and 1 Department of State Services, that's a DSS officer. No additional security personnel will be assigned, and that's according to President Tinubu instructing the National Security Advisor to engage with the military, paramilitary, and security agencies to determine a suitable reduction in their vehicle and security personnel deployment. Gbolahan Olojede is a development economist, and he joins us now to discuss those cost-cutting measures that have been introduced by President Tinubu and to consider whether or not they would be enough and what more can be done. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, you saw it there, that very interesting announcement. First off, we saw that rejig with the ministers, and now we're seeing a call for a reduction of their vehicles, for their personnel, and even when they go out of the country for, assignments. Do you think that when it comes to cost cutting, especially with the current economic state of the country, that President Tinubu is doing enough by putting this statement out there?
I think there are 2 ways to look at it. There is the optics side of things. And then there is the substance in terms of actual naira and kobo that you will save by those measures. From an optics side of things is a fantastic idea. How do you begin to say there is no money, we are not making enough, everybody is crying, and then you get on the road and there are 15 cars following a minister? It doesn't make sense from an optics side of things. The cost might be minimal. I was trying to do some numbers about what that could be. If you have 44 ministers and each of them decides to go on 10 vehicles, that's 440 vehicles on the road. Now, if let's assume that each of those vehicles consume 100,000 naira fuel every week, that measure could actually save about over 2 billion naira per annum in fuel cost alone. So we might say it's not much, but once it's becoming, the numbers are looking like billions, then the optics is very good and maybe a little bit of cost, but there are opportunities for more.
And speaking of those optics, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Knowing how there's a lot of talk and directives that are issued, but the implementation is the issue. And knowing, second of all, that, okay, the budget for the fuel for all these 400 plus cars has already been, I guess, divvied out. What is to say that they won't find another way to reappropriate the same amount of money that could, quote unquote, be saved to something else? What are the checks and balances? How are we even supposed to keep up with whether or not it feels like fuel subsidy all over again. Like, how do we know the numbers are matching up to what is actually being said? Your thoughts?
Those ministries have their own structures, including their own internal audit. Now, when you talk about budget, you cannot, by yourself, take a budget earmarked for something and apply it to something else without going through a process called environment. Now, environment in itself will shine some light on what you're trying to do. So unless there is a compromise within the system when there is compromise, internal control fails. So if people have agreed, I'm supposed to check you, but I decide to look the other way, or maybe I'm collaborating to share the proceeds, then there's a problem right then. Yeah. So it will now behold on higher authorities to drive. You see, at the heart of what we're talking here is also this performance management issue with some of these institutions. So if I had budgeted 100 naira before, and I'm saying now that 100 naira you should only spend 30 naira, you should be accountable to me at the end of the year for the remaining 70. And if you're not, there should be consequences for that.
All right, then, very interesting. And I appreciate Howard being the devil's advocate. So I wouldn't have to do it. But, we're talking about, reducing convoys, reducing personnel, which is a notable step. Some would say maybe more symbolic than anything. But we know that government expenditure in Nigeria is quite extensive. This is just the things that we see. Do you think that there are other areas that should be prioritized by the president for cuts beyond these high visibility adjustments?
Well, I think there are other places. When you look traditionally at our budget, you see that the personnel budget is huge. There was a time when when the overheads were maybe 50-60% of the entire budget in itself. So the indication is that there is a lot of waste on the personnel side of things.
In all of this, which
is all part of it.
Okay.
Anytime you see government saying, we're running a check on the number of staff that we have, they will come up with this thing called ghost workers. Just that nothing really happens after. You see, ghost workers is one of the, I don't know how to describe it. You say that last month I paid 100 people. And then this month I found out that out of the 100, 60, or let's say 20 were ghosts. Mm-hmm. The question is, who collected the salaries of the ghosts last month? Were they held to account? If the salaries were paid by cash, then some people signed for those cash. If it was by transfer, then it went to certain accounts. Those people should be held accountable for the money they collected. I don't think I've heard about people being prosecuted for, and if you don't do it, it will continue to repeat itself. So there's a lot of people who probably shouldn't be there.
Yes.
If you take Lagos, you look at federal government properties that are in Lagos. Right in front of my own office, there's a property there that has become a haven for all sorts of people because it has been abandoned. In fact, on the entire street, which is not residential, it was federal government properties everywhere. Empty. Some of them with broken glasses. So you ask yourself, and guess what? The land on which some of these properties are sitting, that's the land alone, they are over $1 billion in value. And they are all there. Some of them have been there for 20 years. Nobody think something should be done about all of this. Talk about travels. Some of the travels that government people embark on might not actually be as necessary as we think. I'm not saying, for example, that we shouldn't be at hunger. I'm just saying, must we be at every hunger? When you go and present at one General Assembly, what exactly are you telling them that they don't know about you?
What are the benefits?
What are the benefits? Yeah, what is the, And when you go on those trips, you have the travel allowances, the ESTA codes, you have the hotel and accommodation, you have all those things count by the time you start to add them together. So there are other places, those government properties, issues around personnel that may not be real. I can assure you, even at the state level, the same thing is there. Ghosts all over the places, and we're paying them every month. So there is room for improvement in many places.
I mean, with all that being said, does it really sound like we are serious about cost cutting? And if the government is, what more could they be doing? Because right now these measures sound good optics-wise, but we can all agree that it's a cancer. Right now they're trying to put a Band-Aid on something that has metastasized. So what would be the equivalent of surgery on this analogy of mine, Nigeria being the cancer patient? What would be the equivalent cost-cutting wise?
I think we should take what they have done and say, okay, it's a journey. They started with, I used to go around with 50 people, it's now 20. Now the issues of cars have come in. That is fine. But like you rightly alluded to, there is room for a whole lot more. And we should set the example right from the very top. One thing we can do that is fundamental, in my opinion, has to start with the budget of this country. The federal government budget in Nigeria is an authority to spend, not a planning document. A budget is supposed to be a planning document. But Nigeria's budget today is not exactly about planning. It's about, do I have the authority to spend this much? How much do I have an authority to spend? We must change that. The reason that is important is that once they put it in the budget, there's an authority for that ministry to want to spend it. And they probably can find a way to spend it.
Well, that's a development economist, Gbolahan Olojede. Thank you so much for being on here. We appreciate your time and, of course, analysis of the subject matter.
Thanks for having me.